Yes. This webinar is being recorded, and there is an ASL interpreter available for anyone who wants this service. Just spotlight the interpreter screen to view them during today's presentation, and I'll try to do that myself as well. There's also a live captioner who I hope folks can see. And if not, please mention that in the chat, and my co-host Paloma Blasny will note that. Hello and welcome to the National Council for Preservation Education's Summer Webinar Series. There are two educational sessions, one today and one next Thursday, on important topics related to the Federal Historic Preservation Program. I'm Julie Johnson, the Director of NCPE's Internship Program and the moderator of the webinars. This series is offered by NCPE, known as NCPE, in collaboration with the National Park Service's Cultural Resources, Partnerships, and Science Directorate. We have three panelists speaking today on the theme of reaching new audiences, a key part of the mission of education and interpretation of the National Park Service. Next week, we'll cover the topic of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, including how NCPE interns are involved in helping the parks and MPS in general comply with the Act. First, I want to welcome all the NCPE interns, NCPE alumni, interns and fellows from the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and from other agencies and organizations, from the National Park Service and other federal agency staff, and anyone else attending. I'm delighted you can participate and look forward to your questions and comments, which I invite you to put into the chat at any time. Before I introduce our panelists and my co-host from MPS, I want to give you some information about the National Council for Preservation Education. NCPE is a nonprofit coalition of faculty from colleges and universities and trade schools with programs in historic preservation, offering degrees or certificates at the 2-year, 4-year, and graduate levels. The membership consists of 62 schools located in 32 states, with 10 different program types and 9 study abroad options. The organization is guided by a 9-member executive committee. NCPE's purpose is to support instruction and research in the field of historic preservation, to coordinate preservation education initiatives with other private and public entities, and to facilitate the exchange of information and ideas concerning preservation education, and to raise public awareness about preservation education and the field in general. All this is accomplished in a variety of ways. The one most familiar to our attendees and panelists may be the Internship Program, which operates in cooperation with the National Park Service. The Internship Program works closely with another NCPE program, the website PreserveNet, found at preservenet.org, which includes a very active jobs board of permanent and temporary employment, consultancies, fellowships, and internships, among other resources. But NCPE has other programs. It maintains an online guide to academic programs in historic preservation and allied fields in the United States, which can be found at www.ncpe.us. NCPE's Academic Review Committee sets standards for inclusion in the guide, so prospective students can find the program best suited to them. The NCPE website also includes a syllabus bank of over 150 entries from dozens of schools, which are available for use by junior faculty and prospective students who may be interested in topics like heritage conservation, plaster repair, the history of land design, and so on. NCPE publishes an annual peer review journal called Preservation Education and Research, or PER for short. Students, recent graduates, are welcome to review the submission guidelines, also found at www.ncpe.us, and work with the editor to offer your research and writing for publication. And NCPE hosts conferences such as the one held last December on cultural property protection, Indigenous communities, and the U.S. military. These videos can be found on NCPE's YouTube channel, along with other videos from previous conferences, lectures, interviews, and of course, webinars like this from previous years. I invite you to visit NCPE's website to find out more about the organization. I'm delighted today to be joined by Paloma Belazny, the Youth Programs Coordinator at the National Park Service Cultural Resources Office of Interpretation and Education in the Washington Support Office. Paloma is responsible for assembling the speakers in the webinar series and would like to introduce herself and say a few words. So Paloma.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Julie. Thank you everyone for bearing with us with our technical difficulties. I think everyone is here. Hi, I'm Paloma Belazny. I'm the Youth Programs Coordinator for the Cultural Resources Directorate at the National Park Service's Washington office, the Cultural Resources Division, and I work closely with Julie and NCPE in putting together the NCPE Internship Program and other internship programs, and we have a wonderful lineup today of speakers. So I want to turn it right over back to Julie so that we can get started with our wonderful speakers. And as Julie mentioned, we have another webinar next week that I hope you can join as well. And thank you to Julie for hosting today's webinar.
Thank you, Paloma. And yes, we have a packed program today. Thank you for your kind words. This is Julie Johnson speaking, and really appreciate Paloma's time and energy putting together the entire series. So we have 3 panelists today speaking on a variety of topics related to our theme of reaching new audiences. You may put any questions for them in the chat, and we will respond perhaps after each presentation or at the very end, which I hope there will be time for. We'll also provide contact emails for all the speakers at the end, as well as information about the next webinar in this 2-part series. Finally, all the sessions will be uploaded with captioning to NCPE's YouTube channel, which can be found by searching YouTube by the organization's full name, National Council for Preservation Education. The first speaker today is Emily Levine. Emily became the Supervisory Park Ranger at Longfellow House, Washington Headquarters National Historic Site in 2020. Before that, she was Supervisory Park Ranger at Golden Gate National Recreation Area in San Francisco. Her previous experience was in the greater Boston area at Lowe National Historical Park, the Concord Museum, and the Lawrence History Center. One of her aims in her role at Longfellow House, Washington Headquarters, has been to build and expand interpretive programs and community partnerships. Emily has a master's degree in museum education from Tufts University, where her capstone project was reinventing the guided tour, a project I would love to hear more about sometime. So I'm hoping that Emily can take over the screen and share.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie. Endeavor to take over the screen here. All right, am I sharing my presenter view?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
And doing a great job.
Every time. All right. Let me just try to swap them. In the meantime, all right. Am I sharing my non-presenter view now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry, the correct view, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much to Julie and Paloma. It's so good to see you. Thanks for the invitation to chat a little bit this afternoon. I am really looking forward to the other two presenters as well. So I'm here to just briefly share with you about a new internship that we are offering at Longfellow through NCPE, the Descendant Partnerships internship in particular. And shout out to Naomi, who is in week 3 of this position, who I believe is joining us on the call today as well. So again, my name is Emily Levine. I use she and her. I'm the intern supervisor here at the Longfellow House. I'm going to do a little bit of audio description on my slides, and I'll start with myself. So I am a white woman in my mid-30s. I have dark hair, a stripy shirt, and behind me are a bunch of National Park Service reports and fidget toys on a bookshelf. My title slide says Partnerships, Public Engagement, and NCPE at Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters, with my name, title, and email address, which is will be shared out in a little bit. So just to briefly introduce the site, here you see Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters, and on the right side is pictured a Victorian study with red shades, orange carpet, books everywhere, and a big round table in the center. We are a 2-acre National Historic Site and House Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have 7 permanent staff, 6 seasonal staff who are a combination of some interpretation and some cultural resources staff, and then 4 interns who are also split between interpretation and cultural resources. And the broad story that we tell is that over the past 264 years, the inhabitants of this house have shaped our nation through their words and through their actions. And as we tell these stories, public and partner engagement is absolutely critical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our public engagement goals, which you'll see appear on the screen. And these are aspirational, ongoing, long-term goals that keep us moving here. So the first is that Long aims to foster a more productive and inclusive public conversation about history in order to work towards a more just future. And this is a goal that we borrow heavily from the American Association for State and Local History. We also seek to be a resource, a gathering place, and a forum and a historical partner to the Cambridge community, to the Descendant community that we'll talk about, and to the national community. And last but not least, underlying all of this is the core value of inclusive storytelling. And I need to send massive appreciation for Turkiya Lowe and her leadership in the history program on so much, and this point in particular. At Long, when we talk about inclusive storytelling, we're thinking about the traditionally marginalized histories associated with the site as just as important as, and also inseparable from, the Washington and Longfellow stories that appear on the site sign, right? So moving beyond those names on the sign to prioritize the stories of those who were enslaved here, who seized freedom, and who built community. So of course, all of this work is done in partnership. Here, I will read through the slide. On the right side in the foreground, you see a art installation with beautiful blue glass bottles on an iron tree-shaped sculpture. In the background, you see a seated audience outdoors, a poet and a musician dressed in white on a stage under trees. So broadly, our partnerships fall into 3-ish categories. Community-based organizations really run the gamut. They include groups like the Cambridge LGBTQ+ Commission, who has really helped us advance work around interpreting queer history at the site. Historical organizations, including the incredible Royal House and Slave Quarters Museum in Medford, just next door to Cambridge. And then the Descendant community. Since about 2021, the site has had sustained engagement and ongoing relationship building with living descendants of Darby Vassall, who with his family was enslaved by the home's first owner in the 18th century. This family seized freedom around the time of the American Revolution, and Darby Vassall and many of his descendants dedicated their lives to community building and freedom activism. So again, today we work with about 24 living descendants in 3 broad areas. This is still very, very much a building and emerging relationship. So these 3 areas currently include a special history study, This is a Park Service Cultural Resources funded special history study, which kicked off in February with a great outside research team. This has involved developing questions together with the site, the Descendant community, and the research team, really committing to going on this journey of researching their ancestors, researching the Black history of the site in collaboration. And then turning some of these findings, some of these conversations, some of this memory into public programming. So the picture that I described on the right side of the sign is an image from our Juneteenth program just a week or two ago. And then the most formalized part of this relationship so far is with a group called the Slave Legacy History Coalition. This was founded by one descendant family, the Lloyds, in 2021. And the Slave Legacy History Coalition, the SLHC, is a consortium of individuals, organizations, and institutions engaged in the preservation of the history of enslaved people in the Cambridge and Boston communities and beyond. And on the right side, you have a number of logos of affiliate organizations, including History Cambridge, Atlantic Black Box, Cambridge Black History Project, the Museum of African American History, and others. And this is an organization that the Lloyds founded as a way to really connect with the variety of historical organizations that they were interfacing with as they explored their ancestors' histories. And they are also eventually hoping with this organization to reach other families who are looking into their own histories. So SLHC is currently pursuing a 501c3 status. They have fiscal agency under History Cambridge, another great partner of the site. And Longfellow House has been a core member of this coalition since 2021 and has sought to provide some organizational support where we can. So hence the Descendant Partnerships Intern. This is, well, let me go back for a second. This was an idea that emerged from our site manager. And we decided to allocate some of our 2023 intern funding from a more general visitor services internship towards a more tailored internship to support this coalition in partnership with Longfellow and to more broadly support descendant engagement at the site. So this is a very new internship and an evolving relationship. So again, the goals and work plan for the Descendant Partnerships Intern, which is an 1,100-hour NCPE internship, were developed in collaboration with SLHC founders Dennis and Egypt Lloyd, who split their time between Atlanta and Boston. And the partnership-based nature of the internship and the coalition really expanded our recruiting base for this internship. And again, shout out to Naomi, we recruited a really stellar recent graduate who has embraced this prospect of getting to sort of shape the role, shape these relationships, help to shape the organization. So some of the goals of this internship that we laid out initially were for the intern to gain professional experience in partnership building, nonprofit administration, research and interpretation, writing, and online publishing, to support and expand the capacity of the SLHC in those areas, and then to deepen the partnership between this coalition and Longfellow House, Washington's headquarters, and with that broader descendant community. Oops, too much scrolling. Okay. So the Longfellow House staff provide daily support. We try to provide community, connection, computer equipment, office space, research resources. The intern position is a member of the interpretation work group and the community engagement team. So that is sort of a new team that consists of myself, the lead ranger. We have a community volunteer ambassador intern at the site, as well as another NCPE intern working on family programming. The idea here is to sort of informally share resources, share ideas, and peer support. I will not read this slide word for word that shows the Descendant Partnerships intern excerpted work plan, just so you can get a little bit of an idea about what we're working on. And if anybody's interested in seeing the more detailed work plan, you can chat me on Teams and I'm happy to share that. But this is a work in progress. We are learning much from our partners, from other parks that have done related work, from everybody who's involved in this internship, which will continue to be shaped in collaboration with the coalition, with partners, with, again, the broader Descendant community, and Naomi herself. So just so you can get a brief idea, and then I will wrap up of some of the projects that are on the intern's plate: researching and developing historical content, conducting partner outreach and coordination on behalf of that coalition and coordinating some of their meetings, supporting and developing strategic initiatives as the organization becomes a 501c3, and then bringing some of that work into connection really with the Longfellow House, taking that research, translating it into public programs on site here, attending monthly check-ins on the special history study, making recommendations to the site, drawing on the rubric for engaging Descendant communities for broader ongoing Descendant engagement, which also includes things like assisting with our annual Juneteenth event and an upcoming August gathering. So lots of work in progress. Again, the name of the game here is partnerships and collaboration at every level. We have, again, a huge amount to learn and to work on. So I would love to chat. This is an open invitation to get me on Teams, on email. I'm a little unreliable with my phone, but you can try that too. I would love to brainstorm. I would love advice. I would love to chat about any of this. So thank you all very much again for the chance to chat a little bit today, and I will stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was fantastic. There's a lot of great information there for us. I want to use this opportunity to ask if, do we need to switch out the interpreter? Are we doing okay there? Excellent. Okay, good. Thank you. And if there are any questions for Emily, go ahead, put them in either the chat or the Q&A, whichever one is available to you. Both will be checked. And hopefully at the end, we can do some wrap up and talk about interpretation and education and some broader themes, not only what we're doing, but why we're doing it. That would be great. Our next speaker is, let's see, Dr. Turkiya Lowe. I have a few introductory remarks to say. In 2017, Turkiya Lowe became the chief historian of the National Park Service, the 11th person to fill that role since 1931. Before that, she served as the NPS Southeast Region Chief Historian and the chief for the Southeast Region's Cultural Resources Research and Science Branch, where she oversaw the region-wide history and cultural anthropology programs for all the national parks located in 9 states, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Dr. Lowe has previous experience with the Cultural Resources Diversity Internship Program and the National Historic Landmarks National Register programs. She's a graduate of Howard University with advanced degrees from the University of Washington in Seattle. I really look forward to your presentation, Turkiya.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Meeting all of you and speaking with all of you is something that I consider part of my privilege and pleasure in being in this role. Like many of you, I started my career with the National Park Service as an intern, as a member of the Cultural Resources Diversity Internship Program in 24 years ago in June. Wow. As part of the first class of CRDIP. So I understand where many of you are and hope that some of the information I share with you will get you where you want to go with the National Park Service or in cultural resources management generally. My presentation is one where I'm going to talk about some of the responsibilities for inclusive storytelling within the National Park Service, but I think there are principles that can be expanded. And thank you so much for the shout out and for acknowledging that some of the work that I do has assisted Longfellow in moving towards its goals. So first I'll share my screen. Unfortunately, that covered up the ship. Hold on, let me stop sharing for a quick second. Sharing again. While I get this technical difficulties, sorry, I've been having challenges all day. There it is. All right, so, oh, wait, no, this is not it. Ah, there it is. Wow, can't believe this is happening. It's all teed up. So one of the things I wanted to share, since I can't share my screen right now, can you see the slides, even though it's not in presenter mode?
Yeah, what we're seeing is the National Park Service history careers. That's the large image that we're seeing. And then we're also seeing the thumbnails along the left-hand side.
Okay. That's not what is showing on my screen at all.
All right. That's all right.
Okay. Although I can talk about NPS careers, if that's what's showing. That is actually the #1 question that I receive. How do I begin to work with the National Park Service? Okay. One more
time. Inclusive history, storytelling, and stewardship. Is that the one?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Okay. So I always like to begin by starting off with, again, it won't go to from the beginning. All right. Taking the time to talk about inclusive history and storytelling and stewardship, right? NPS has such a broad role, ourselves being the stewards of so many park units of the National Park System, but also assisting other federal agencies, local state governments, and community partners with doing their own storytelling and interpretation. I usually start off with just a general overview of the National Park Service. Many of you are working in the Cultural Resources Associate Directorate, but what about the larger National Park Service as an agency? Most of you know that we were founded in 1916 and are separated into regions, right? Most of the regions in National Park Service are 7. Inclusive of the Washington Support Office, 424 parks. What most people don't know is that the National Park Service has more than 72 community assistance programs, which are charged with assisting other entities with doing their cultural resources, interpretive, public education, and historic preservation work. We are facilitators, not only for ourselves, but for local communities, local stewards, to care for their own stories, to tell their own stories in a way that's most effective for them. We are changing our employment, but we have approximately 20 to 21,000 employees and volunteers within the agency, and you are important volunteers. We would not be able to complete the mission of the National Park Service through either our park system or through our community assistance programs without your active engagement. So we really do appreciate how you come into our agency and reinvigorate us, bring your own perspectives, bring your own expertise and knowledge to how we carry out the mission of the Park Service. And of course, we are nothing without our visitorship, right? We actually have more visitors in a year, visits in a year than we have a population of the US. And so it's very important that the stories we tell are ones that engage the visitor, that they're factual, that they're meaningful, and that they tell multiple perspectives, an expanded story. So how do we do that? Again, through our pyramid of federal recognition. These are all the places, right? Those places that tell the history of the United States and the global community, and all the various designations that we at the Park Service hold to assist communities with telling their own stories. So what's our responsibility? And what gives us the authority to tell these stories from multiple perspectives, right? History that is difficult, history that is celebratory, history that is commemorative, right? And that not only guides us in what happened, the events, but also the impacts and legacies. So these are kind of the brief list of all of the authorities and the underpinnings for what our responsibility is as the Park Service to be inclusive in our history and storytelling, and for caring for the diverse cultural resources and historic resources that we have in our country. So one of the things I like to talk about is how we internally and others, again, I always give this to kind of to MPS staff, but the 4 pillars of how we are to do inclusive storytelling. And the first, I think, is most important, is to evaluate and hold ourselves accountable for the information that we have and that we provide to others, right? That we be responsive to our visitor and staff feedback, right? On the stories that we tell, the facts that we share, responding to their questions, not in a spirit of justification, but a spirit of explanation, a spirit of facilitation, a spirit of collaboration, right? And even going ideally towards co-creation. Understanding, again, that not everyone will agree, support, or even engage in some of the conversations that we have, some of the discussions that we facilitate, but we create a place of both safety and bravery in order to have these discussions. And safety doesn't only mean physical safety, but also of well-being, right? For both our visitors and staff to be able to pause, to reflect, and to process the diverse stories that we're telling. How we address the comments that come back to us, feedback, right? From visitors and staff, but to not enter into a realm of trying to defend worth, right? Rather than being a facilitator of the various meanings an event or legacy or an impact has on others. This is very important. While we hold ourselves accountable and we evaluate, we also have to understand where we are individually in relation to the various inclusive stories that we tell, right? What is my own personal identity, experience, and perspective? And how does that create spaces for voices to be heard, right? Examine yourself for your own explicit and implicit biases. What causes us as an agency, both structurally and individually, right, to tell some stories and not others, or to tell a particular story from a specific perspective other than others. Also, power, privilege, and authority, right? Myself as principal historian for the National Park Service may or may not have more authority to affect the stories that are that in the research and the documentation that is undertaken in the National Park Service, but park historians, where they are in their location, have great authority in order to engage with the types of talking points, the focus of exhibits, engagement one-on-one with a visitor that I, in my position, do not have. So what is the individual power, privilege, and authority of each of us to affect either change or to broaden the interpretation of the story, to bring in multiple voices? And of course, we're all humans, right? We're all human beings. What's your professional and personal interest, right? I am a historian of African-American history and women's history and social historian. I am not one that is interested in bird watching or hiking. A light trail hike is great, but I'm not going to go into the canyon at Grand Canyon because that's not part of my personal and professional interests. And so we also, as an organization, have to allow our visitors to have the type of engagement with our resources that they choose to have, right? And understand that our professional and personal interests may not be that of our visitor, but that is still something that we facilitate. So what are resources that we can use in order to evaluate and hold ourselves accountable, in order to understand what our relationship is to the inclusive stories we tell? I used to have a monograph on here, a picture of a book about anti-racism, right? And I realized in the current climate, it's not so much any ideology or methodology. It is the connection that we make to other human beings through empathy. The understanding that the way I experience an event or a historical event may not be the way that someone else has experienced that event and the impacts of that event. And it is with my own empathy towards that other human being that I recognize that something that gives me privilege, power, and pleasure can be oppressive to another. And how do we use our freedom, our responsibility, our power, our authority to lessen the hurts to others? And one of the ways that we do that is through finding ways to be more inclusive, again, of the stories we tell, of the voices that are telling the stories, and the spaces that we preserve and protect that do that. And so there are lots of resources out there within the National Park Service. We have our Office of Relevancy, Diversity, and Inclusion. We have developed various employee resource groups, which assist our staff to become allies, to be a safe space to bring up issues and concerns for specific resource groups. We have partnerships with other organizations such as the Smithsonian, NAMAC, National Museum of African American History and Culture, International Coalition of Sites of Consciousness, as well, and other various partnerships. And I'll come back to partnerships. So from there, right, evaluating and holding ourselves accountable, understanding what our identity is, our relationship, our power, our personal interest, then we do the research, right? We do the research and try to understand the stories from multiple perspectives, from the various communities that experience the event, where the impacts have been broader than just the small group in which the event, who witnessed the event, or who were the actors in the event, as well as the legacies that exist today, right? And become a foundation to what what we do today, right? Politically, socially, economically. So find the scholarly sources, right? Professional, vetted, or knowledge that is generated through participation in a culture, or being in a culture, or experience in that history. Understand what the who, what, when, how of the event that happens, and what's the historic context. Why did it happen in this place? Why did it happen at this time? That's always one of the goals of a national park unit specifically, is to understand why a battle took place in this particular space. Was it the geography? Was it transportation? Why did it happen here at this time? And then again, the impact and legacies, the so what. And so what now do we do with what happened in the past? Make sure that your research is current, right? The information that we have available to us now is not the information that our parents had or our grandparents have. Our modes of communication, outward and receipt of information is different. And so we have to ensure that our research is current to the scholarship that's being produced now, and ask new questions of old scholarship. So again, partnerships are key. I think I've said this several times. Within the National Park Service, we try to break out of our silos. Some of those still exist. But these are the folks on the left-hand side, or my left, maybe your right, if you have an inversion of your screen, of who we collaborate with as we go about these tenants. And what do we ask for when we are attempting to ask ourselves new questions of the resources and the scholarships? We develop what's called special history studies, which looks at a historical overview of a topic. Lately, we have been looking at African-American history, Indigenous history. The Park History Program is undertaking a Disability in United States History handbook, which we have never explored before in the National Park Service as a holistic topic. Individual sites have addressed disability history. as well as in our accessibility program, and staff who have been doing yeoman's work for decades about ensuring that our visitor services are accessible. But this is our first time as an agency exploring the topic of history of disability in the U.S. as a whole. So we have various ways that we are able to fund and resource inclusive storytelling. We have our service-wide combined call, which is a competitive, sorry, I'm taking too long, competitive process through which parks can get there. We help to fund through grants and fellowships, your internships, to be able to explore these topics more fully. And then we incorporate it into the work that we do through special events or through our regular operations. We have to be able to make management decisions, broad scale management decisions about how the agency will pursue a certain topic or resource protection. And then leverage opportunities as they come along, such as, with commemorations of historical events that allow us to highlight that information. So again, for inclusive storytelling, we have challenges, opportunities, and responsibilities to do so. And these are the four kind of methods that I always advise our parks and partners to use as they go about the work. And then a quick slide up about employment opportunities, because again, this is the #1 question I get asked about how to engage with the National Park Service. Thanks.
That was great. Thank you so much, Turkiya. And I just want to say that our third speaker, Lonnie Wright, is not going to be able to join us today after all. So I really appreciate Turkiya's more full explanation of the work that she does and interpretation. So really like that. Are there any questions? I'm not sure if I'm seeing any in the Q&A. I did have a question, and maybe this is for Turkiya or Emily, I'm not quite sure. But Turkiya, you mentioned the executive order, I believe, about the advancing racial equality. And I didn't know when that was signed. And in your experience, do you feel, since you've been in your position for a while now, was that something that promoted something that was already in train, or did it initiate more outreach to a broader community?
So that's a very good question. From my perspective, it did not create more. What it allowed was at least for the Park Service to frame some of the work that we're already doing under this executive order, right? And gave us greater prioritization of the work that was already going on in terms of the work that we were already doing. What has sparked more work is actually the appropriation of funding from Congress, right? It's great to have an executive order, but if you do not have the funding to undertake activities related to it, it can be challenging. And two fund sources that I would highlight is during the centennial in 2016, Congress for the first time authorized $5 million for parks to undertake projects related to African American civil rights and African American history. It also gave a portion of that funding to cultural resources and to the interpretation and education side. So not only doing the research, but also creating interpretation related to it. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And I guess to bring it back home to Washington's headquarters, Longfellow, I don't know if Emily is still on here, but I was kind of curious to find out how that site specifically has changed. You talked a lot about what's going forward, but if we had visited 20 years ago, I'm assuming that would be maybe a somewhat different place. And I don't know if you want to say a few words about that.
Sure, thank you. So I have about 3 years of direct perspective here. We just had an administrative history published, so if you want to take the deep dive, that's available. But I think there have been folks at this site seeding a lot of this more expansive, more inclusive storytelling for a number of years. The site first was in touch with descendant families in 2015 by virtue of a converging tree on ancestry, one person working forwards, one person at the site working backwards. And there was sort of periodic relationships, contact between 2015-ish and 2021, where folks actually held a family gathering here, and the site and several of the families have been in much more regular and collaborative contact since then. But again, very much a long-term process. I think like traditional interpretation at the site has been the Longfellow and the Washington stories. When it was established in 1972 as a National Historic Site, it was Longfellow National Historic Site, and it was in the early 2000s that Washington's headquarters was added, an acknowledgement of some of the other history that took place at the site in addition to the 19th century poet, but certainly not the whole story. And so I think it's really over the last several years, definitely longer than my time, I'd give it, 10, 15 years, that a lot of folks on site have been researching the Black history associated with the site, both the history of enslavement, self-emancipation, and activism. And then a particular focus as well has been the queer history, and that's really been advanced by a number of folks, including some of our seasonal interpretive employees who have gotten into the archives on site here and pulled out some really key stories of queer history and residents and community in the house. So we're just going to keep going and see how this continues to evolve in a more nuanced and more layered and a more inclusive way. But yeah, I think that, you were here 20, 30 years ago, you'd hear about George Washington, you'd hear about Henry Longfellow, maybe his kids, and, the names on the sign, and we're working to continue to expand that out. But again, I also want to acknowledge that this work does not exist without those relationships, the advocacy of the living descendants, and their advocacy around honoring their ancestors' stories, bringing those to the forefront, bringing those to the public. So that partnership, that relationship is absolutely really key.
Fantastic. And if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. I don't know if
in the Q&A, put them in the Q&A.
In the Q&A, is that better? Okay.
Yes.
And one seems to work and others doesn't, and it changes from time to time. So sounds great. And I'm not seeing any questions, so we might do a bit of a wrap up. I did want to mention on the same theme of reaching new audiences, we did have a NCPE intern last year. Oh, I do want to share my screen and share information about, there we go. There we go. There. I think that's it. Hopefully everybody can see the contact information for our speakers today. I also wanted to share some information, and I'm not sure if I can put it in the chat, about a NCPE intern last year who was on the podcast called, let me find it here. If you're familiar with Save As, Next Gen Heritage Conservation podcast. She was in Beaufort, South Carolina, Emily Varley, and she did a wonderful job about finding new information about the site that was actually so present that had a tremendous impact on actually interpretation. And I'll put that information, if I can find it back again, in the chat. Because I think you would enjoy taking a look at that. Let's see if I can do that. And let me type a few words here in the chat. And excuse me while I type. And I strongly recommend this podcast for those of you who are in the business like we are. This was season 3, episode 13, and really was fantastic information, very personal from the perspective of a NCPE intern who actually turned that project into her master's thesis and had a significant impact on the work being done at her site, Reconstruction Era, a National Historical Park in Beaufort, South Carolina.
Thank you for sharing that, Julie. That is really cool.
Yeah, it's very inspiring.
Yeah, and on that note, if there's any other intern, any of you out there who has who's in the news, if any of your projects make a podcast, or if you produce anything, please do share it with Julie, or if you're with another partner organization, share it with your partner organization. We love to hear what you're doing, and we're able to share it farther, and so we can our reach is greater if you share it. We can share your work. So by sharing with Julie, we can share it farther. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And I want to thank our panelists today for speaking on such an interesting topic. And I have a feeling that we could do a whole series of these over many parks and many programs to talk about the new and interesting ways that we are engaging existing audiences and new audiences, and helping the Park Service tell all American stories. So on that note, we do have information somewhere, and I'll put it in the chat or I'll send it out again. If you signed up for today's webinar, you are signed up for next week's. So it's the same link. It'll be sent out again. Thank you so much again to our panelists and to everyone for attending and bearing with some technical difficulties. And so long.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. Thank you. Thanks, Turkiya and Emily.